was really
Welcome,
nice.
welcome to tvosj.org, the voice of San Joaquin. And now it is time for Connections, Peace, and Justice Radio.
Good evening. This is Bruce Giudici with Peace and Justice Connections, editor of Connections. We're going to be talking about that this evening with Kristie Kelly, who's a longtime member of the Peace and Justice Network and longtime person who's been working for peace and justice. And so anyway, this paper just came off the press on Friday, and this is Monday, so we figured of a preview, so you'd be encouraged to pick it up. It is it's the connections with the gold color on the front, and this time around, welcome, Kristie.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah, you've been up north recently.
Out and about with grandchildren.
Yeah, up in Washington,
Bellingham, Washington,
and not Portland.
Portland, Oregon, but the year in Bellingham with a new grandbaby.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, I've seen some pictures. Really cute little babies.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, to the point of connections, where the cover issue this time is talking about how to help the undocumented. And so there's a lot of things that are happening in this world today that are pretty horrible, terrible, difficult to swallow. But one of maybe the worst thing that's happening is what's happening on our border, and what's happening in the dehumanization of people who are struggling to find asylum in this country, asylum that has been freely given by our country since its founding. And now what we're finding is that we have an administration that has no interest in doing the right or humane thing, and has every interest in trying to keep people away from our country at a time when we really need more diversity, more people who care, and more people who are really striving to find freedom here.
I think it's beyond keeping them away. I think I don't want to get into conspiracy or anything like that, but I think the mentality is that you go for the weakest, and the weakest are these people who are desperate for their lives, desperate for protecting their families, and desperate to live a life that is human and humane, and have come to this country not because that's, they have choices. They have no choice. This is their last-ditch effort. And if you pick on the weakest link and dehumanize them, it's interesting what it brings out in humans, the basest kind of reaction in humans, that somehow these are not people worthy of respect, not worthy of being related to with dignity.
Right.
And so it makes it easier for people like those who are in power right now to accelerate their power and make bigger and bigger decisions that push down more and more of us. So I don't remember who said it. It's a great poster, but first they came for the, I don't know.
For the gays.
For the gays, and I wasn't one of them. And then they came for somebody else, and I wasn't one of them. And eventually they're going to come for you. We're all going to be pushed down if we continue to accept and not pay attention to this and demand that there be a stop to it, and that families be reunited, that children are not held in these places. It's just beyond belief that we're not all out in the streets every day, all day.
Yeah.
And in front of these concentration camps, and demanding that they close, and demanding the workers reevaluate what are they doing.
Yeah. And, we don't really have to have an equivalency between, what has happened in historical, different countries, or, what we can do is we can just look at the absolute inhumanity of what we are imposing on people, and not having to say, well, it is important to remember history, and it's important for us to know that, yes, we did incarcerate Japanese Americans here during World War II, and that there were, and those could be called concentration camps very rightly, and the way that people were inhumanely treated back then. Right now, these individuals are they're dying. They're dying in our in our custody.
They're physically dying,
Yes.
and emotionally they're dying.
Right. And you know, and so and you know, metaphorically, our country is dying, because if we allow this to continue, then how callous have we become that this becomes part of the new normal of this administration.
Right. Which is
Right.
okay. So
So going into the cover the cover article, this is talking about NorCal Resist, and I came across these guys because there was a protest that was happening up in Sutter Creek, just around the corner from where I work, and it was on a Friday when I was already doing some other, actually doing the normal second Friday demonstration that we do at the corner of Highway 4 and 49, but this was I guess it was a nationwide protest.
Yes.
That was to call out what's going on at the border in terms of immigration in general and asylum. And so I was drawn to this organization that is out of Sacramento, and what they have is they have some action items that we can do to keep people from being deported, from knowing what their rights are in terms of being a Migra Watch observer, as we can as American citizens, and so that we can protect ICE against protect these folks against the actions of ICE.
And one of our local groups is Faith in the Valley, and they did an action as well at the ICE office here in Stockton. And they're a group to keep an eye on and check in with what they're doing, along with several other community groups. I'm sorry I don't have their names now, but yeah, it's really important. I don't know how many of us are in a neighborhood where you're going to see ICE come. But those who are, we need to keep getting the word out, what their rights are and what we can do to protect them when they need protecting.
Yeah, it's because on the page 11 on the inside of the paper, Lights for Liberty, the San Joaquin protesters turn out to end human detention camps, and there's some photos there of local folks who were turning out at this Friday rally. And the organization that we're sort of steering people to is norcalresist.org. And they have subscribing to their email list. They will keep you up to date as to what is happening in the Valley. And if we are interested in setting up an organization or a chapter in our area, these are the guys who we can turn to help us do that. And we're working with the Faith in the Valley folks. I know that they've turned out some other some demonstrations that have been pretty effective.
Yeah. And then on the front page above the fold is Bruce's editorial, which is really nice. Let's not be distracted by all the little petty things that are happening. They're not that petty.
They're not,
but they're not what's really happening, and we need to stay focused on the important issues that are long term. Yeah,
because the thing is I started with the head saying resist distraction, because it says headlines sell papers, clicks, and airtime, and from racist and so these are the things that are selling papers. Racist rants to shooting down drones, trade wars to Russian meddling, caravans to North Korean talks. All of those issues are very important, but if we don't focus on the evil that is happening in the administration right now, and really work hard to focus on exactly what, and my point is the focus that they're doing is they're bankrupting our future by giving control of our economy and our environment to the wealthiest top 0.1%. And so the whole concept behind this administration is distracting people so that they do not know that their environment is being destroyed to the benefit of the richest 0.1% of the people in this world. And so those folks are the ones who are reaping the benefit of whatever tax cut was passed a couple years ago, and any regulations against labor and against the environment that happens right now. That's the objective here. And so if Trump gets out of with 4 years after having bankrupted this country even more, so that we're so hamstrung that we can't solve our problems through a community government effort, then he would have succeeded. Yeah. And so what we need to do is we have to recognize that and understand that page 17, because we don't want to ever get too political here. But page 17 says a failure to impeach Trump reaffirms him. And so the thing is if this administration is not called to account for what has happened here, that is only going to enable the next. I can't imagine anything more extravagant than this guy coming in. But
it's possible.
It is, yeah. I mean, I didn't think anything worse than George W. Bush could have happened. But that was before, when I thought nothing worse than Ronald Reagan could happen.
Right.
So it's like the circles keep on descending, and so anyway, pick up a paper, check out the immigration issue on page 1, and then also the following on page 11. So on page 2. We have, again, this is really my editorial. The front page was just sort of a synopsis, sort of an alert. But on page 2 also talks about the explicit embrace of racism is next. And so to what point are we going to accept these no longer dog whistles, but they are just essentially nobody's even concerned about covering up that they're saying racist things.
Right.
It's
blatant, out and out blatant.
Right.
Racism. And evil. Yeah, it's all evil.
Yeah. It's and the point of this article says the middle of it, and I remember Wilbur Hubble mentioning to me or telling me that we are all racist. This is America. Did you grow up in America? You are racist. You grew up in a racist country, and we all spend our lives marinating in America's legacy of racism, soaking it in by osmosis. It is not a moral judgment. It's a fact. And it's, if you just have to look at the world in a certain way and say, oh, I'm not racist. I listen to PBS. You can't. Everybody looks at this system in a racist.
We have that lens. We just have that lens, and we have to recognize that and be vigilant and constantly move forward.
Yeah, and
to understand how are we expressing that, but at the same time holding people accountable when something comes out that is racist.
Right, and so it says some people accept this and work to overcome and change it. Other people deny it and let others carry on as they are, and still others wallow in it, drink it in, and allow it to poison their minds forever. And so collectively, we in America have been fighting this battle with ourselves for 400 years. We make a little progress and then we fall back. And so right now is a time when we have to recognize that our leadership has gone too far. Not all of our leadership. I mean, there's a certain, administration that is leading people in this direction because somehow they think that by riling up the most racist of their base, they can somehow win in the next election.
Yeah,
and
it worked before.
Yeah, and so right, the Southern strategy of Reagan and Wallace and
right.
Not Reagan, Nixon. I'm sorry, Nixon and Wallace, the different guy. But anyway, then also on page 2 is sort of a lighter bit. Talks about. I mean, it's sort of lighter. It's some book reviews, some suggestions of environmental books that you can pick up and read about wildlife conservation, pollution, public lands, and there's a partial list, and you go to Revelator Reads in their archive, and they come out with a list every month on environmental stuff. So you ought to check that out. It's a really good list. On the page 3, Eric Parfrey, local environmental activist, has written a series of 3 things. This is the first of what he's written, and the collapse of fact-based print journalism. And it is a very real concern that because of the triumph of social media and Google and all things electronic, local print media is having a very hard time making ends meet. And we've seen that in the demise of the Stockton Record. where that used once vibrant paper is now just seems to be hanging on by a thread. I mean, they're laying
But they're
off.
still there. It's
They're
amazing.
still there.
Like I've been up in the Northwest, and very
Yeah.
few have a daily newspaper.
Jeez. Yeah, and
Yeah.
people just need to subscribe and support their local
Yes,
newspaper.
yes.
And that's essentially what he's mentioning here. I know up in Calaveras County, we used to have a paper that came out twice a week. Now it comes out once a week. And so it's true that there is a lot of information out there on the internet. It's just I was looking at when I'm at work. Sometimes I pull up Google News. I don't know if you ever do that. Yeah,
try to avoid
it's
it.
one of their apps.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't know if they just cater to the people who pay more money to boost their news on top. Can you imagine doing that? But
Right.
but you know, at one time it seemed that maybe even a year ago, the news that they had was, you know, fairly balanced corporate news. But more and more, like they have like 4 or 5 headlines that cover a certain topic. And more recently, I would say between 3 and 4 of the 5 of 3, you know, 3, at least 3 of the top ones are either Fox News or the Washington Examiner.
Oh, that's pretty telling.
Yeah, it is pretty telling.
Yeah.
And you know, and then, you know, and so that constitutes the major right wing. I mean, it's not Breitbart News or anything,
But that's Google News, and
that's Google News.
Huge.
That's huge. Yeah, because and then that's balanced by NBC News and you know, maybe NPR or something. But still, you know, the balance is so far skewed to the right. And if people just want to pull up a news headline and they don't really think about, you know, who's giving them this information, and all they're thinking about is, oh, this is the news. I guess it's generic news. And Google, I mean, they're just, you know, run of the mill. You know, they're right down the middle.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
it's kind of concerning because I'm just worried about how, you know, going into this this next election series season, that. You know, I think we've seen a lot of this about how the news is being skewed to make certain that certain candidates have a leg up.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
No, we got to keep an eye on that, and you've
Yeah.
got to keep looking for various outlets and supporting your local newspaper as well as supporting connections. It's really
right.
important. This is an amazing paper that gives you
Yeah.
a broad range of things. We're not timely. We're not today's
No.
news. It's news it's news that's past, but it gives you a perspective that you're not going to get unless you are really good at finding that yourself.
And the idea is to provide context that what news you are getting that will allow you to understand what you're getting. And so, like the bottom section here, Sunday morning network shows enable Trump. And so the discussion, I don't know if anybody watches the Sunday morning news shows anymore, but they do sort of set the tone for what mainstream or corporate news is going to be talking about the following week. And this article just talks about how the folks who are asked on these shows are center right, if not totally right wing folks, and that the questions that are asked of liberal folks are a lot more probing and I don't know, argumentative than are the softball questions that a lot of right wing folks are given. And I don't know if they're just catering to people who are in power at this point or not. But it does. I mean, Chuck Todd is one who's mentioned pretty strongly here, and I've watched Meet the Press quite a few times, and I've just I don't know. I'm just appalled at what qualifies as being like a national reporter's questions of important newsmakers.
Right. Pretty shallow.
Pretty shallow, and also very. I don't know. They're just sort of in the face of say somebody like Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren, and then if it's something like Mick Mulvaney or Pompeo or these folks, they'll let them slide and won't really ask them the probing questions. And so anyway, so that's what Connections tries to do, is it tries to provide you with context. So the next time you watch one of those Sunday shows, maybe you want to take a think about the quality of information you're getting. This next article is by Mary Elizabeth. She came on our show a couple weeks ago talking about groundwater and groundwater supplies. And so this talks about a Stockton-Dixon water merger as being a bad deal. That people should take action, should read through this, and it talks about you're being able to apply for some water subsidy on at the end of the article, but the beginning of it talks about how the deal between Stockton and Dixon water districts is pretty much totally in the favor of the higher income Dixon district. And it seems that the Stockton is, being taken to the cleaner. So the thing is, want to read through that article and check it out. There's some action that you can take in terms of, sending letters to your local representatives. And so that's that.
Great.
Yeah. Pages 5 and 6. We're talking about medical stuff, and some of this we talked about a couple weeks ago, maybe last week, with Kathy Mathis. And we were talking about this Medicare for None article by Vic, and then we had talked about that, about how some of these myths that the people are talking about, that Medicare for all will turn America into a socialist country. There'll be more government control over our health care. There won't be any choice or other options, and each of these myths are sort of debunked in this article, and it's a very good article.
Good.
Yeah, because right now, and we've talked about this a lot in Kathy and Max's time here. Right now is a real important time to talk about Medicare for all. It's a time of action. It's a time for people to take it seriously. I think a lot of people are taking it seriously, but if you watch the corporate media, there's a lot of folks whose bills are being paid for by the existing medical ripoff. There are, the drug companies that essentially subsidize the nightly news hours, and a lot of other shows. I mean, the amounts of the cost of the drugs that we're forced to buy at whatever price the drug companies say. That system provides enough money for everybody to get rich on.
Right.
I mean, I'm sure a lot of people would not be, without this system, there would be, fewer six-digit incomes for middle managers in drug companies.
They would suffer.
Yeah, they would suffer. Oh, so sad. And blame U.S. trade policy for sky-high drug prices. This is talking about the trade policy that Trump is trying to push in terms of what is it called, intellectual property, about patents for drugs, for essentially shutting out generics from less developed countries like, say, India. That's what this is talking about, and essentially using trade policy to keep our drug prices high. So you might want to take a look at that article. And then, again, on staying on drugs, because, we want to stay on drugs. On page 6, talking about industry drug price setting explained. And it is just, I don't know. I don't know if anybody is forced to take or has to take prescription drugs at some point in their lives. And most people. Cholesterol or high blood pressure or whatever.
Just the basics, much less if you have some condition that you would need a drug for the rest of your life.
Right. And so then this discusses the price setting process by which pharmaceutical companies are able to just make money out of nothing. Some of the costs of some of these drugs are like, a nickel a pill, and then they're able to sell them for like $1 or $2 or $10, or in fact, there's something here they talk about $10,000 per dose. Yeah, and so that's an extreme. But the thing is that the point of the article is that there's no limit. They can set whatever price they want because it's just a market, and whatever
Capitalism.
whatever they're able to charge is what they can get away with. So anyway, it's a very interesting article, and so you might want to check that out. And so again, this may not be today's news that talks about a trade agreement that happened yesterday, but it puts a lot of the stuff a lot of the issues into context, because you wonder why there are so many voices against a Medicare for All system, where drug prices would be controlled, where you would have a single market to which these drug companies could sell their products, and they wouldn't be allowed to charge whatever the insurance company allowed them to charge.
And we take care of people.
Right.
Humans.
Right. The focus would be on people.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, so that's, so if the more articles, if you go back into other issues of Connections, you'll see that this case is being built as to saying this is why it criticizes the existing system. This is why people are so resistant to changing the existing system, because there's so much money in it.
Right.
It's 18% of our economy. Our economy is huge. Huge.
Wow.
Huge, I say. Anyway, then on page 7, the Congressional Budget Office talks about how a $15 federal minimum wage would lift 1.3 million people out of poverty. Every time a minimum wage increase has been proposed, the extreme right wing and their billionaire campaign contributors claim that jobs will be destroyed. They have been proven dead wrong. It is time to raise the minimum wage to at least $15 an hour. And so
Absolutely.
In California, we're on that path.
Yes.
But in places like Alabama, Mississippi, and Arkansas, they are not on that path.
No, their minimum wages are so low.
$7.25.
And if you work in a tip position, I think it's even less.
Yeah, and that's always been the case. It's always been like $2 an hour if you're a tip person, because they assume the other $5 an hour you'll get in a tip.
It's just a different world. We're in a different world.
Yeah, I mean, and if whenever you see an hourly wage of like $7.25, the typical number of working hours in a year are 2080. So what you can always do is, if you want to say, well, gee, $7.25 an hour, what would that pay if it were full time? Well, let's see, it'd be 2,000. It's essentially 2,000 times 7, so about 14,000. Say 14,500. $14,000 and $14,500 is how much you would make in a year
Without taxes.
So
Wow.
that's $1,200 a month. $1,200 a month, because $1,440 divided by 12 is so it's $1,200 a month. And I know in California it's skewed, but even then, where on earth can you pay for rent and health insurance and food and clothing and childcare and a vehicle and fuel?
No.
12, I mean,
No.
no. It's not.
Doesn't happen.
No. And we're talking about a country in which we just had a massive tax cut that benefited the top 1%. I think 80 or 90% of the benefit of the last tax cut went to the top 1%. And so those are the folks who when they get an extra dollar, they can decide, well, gee, will I spend this or will I not spend it? Will I not put it in the economy and make it grow? But if you give that dollar to a person who's making $14,000 a year, you can bet that they're going to put it right back in the economy, and they're going to employ somebody at a local store or a local car place, or
they'll be healthy enough to go to their job.
Right. Yeah.
Or go to school. They'll have eaten that day.
Yeah, especially if you have Medicare for All, so you don't have to worry about a premium being taken out of your paycheck. It just makes common sense. It makes common economic sense. Mm-hmm. But there are a lot of folks who have who have economic power, who are not really all that interested in necessarily boosting the economy until they really have to. And so the thing is, when we start talking about possible recession now, which is it's just hard to believe after having gone so much into debt in the last couple years, and we're already in what, $1 trillion a year debt situation, and now they're talking about going into recession. The thing is that you're supposed to be debt-free or at least contributing to your surplus when you start talking about going into recession. If you're already so deep in the hole, and then now they're talking about decreasing interest rates, at some point, it'll just be real interesting to see what this economy looks like when Trump is through with it. It is just, it is just malpractice. And then on the bottom, we have another article on helping migrants from outrage to action. And anyway, we're just talking about protest and about people standing up and saying, and if you see something wrong, read through this article, and it gets you inspired to say, write about it. Write a letter, protest. When a protest does come up, which may be coming soon.
Well, be there.
Yeah, be there. Be active. Now we turn to foreign policy, and it's interesting, and this sort of speaks to a lot of what's happening, just in general when the United States is involved in any place overseas. A lot of times with the way that we lead in our diplomatic or in our interactions with less developed countries, or even with, just mostly with less developed countries, is we lead with the military. And so the way that we are able to control the flow of resources is to make certain that we have a compliant government installed that we can very easily push around and pay off and make certain that happens. And so with and when we do have conflict, it's when the country that we're trying to push around won't be pushed around.
Right.
And so what you'll see is now with Iran is it's very concerning, because Iran has a long and rich history, as Persia and now as Iran, that a cultural history and also a history with the United States in terms of the Mossadegh and the Shah coming in and replacing him in a coup, and then also, of course, the 1979 Khomeini overthrow. That whole history is being brought to the fore, where the United States is insisting that once again that we know that we should have the right to tell Iranians what to do, and they're saying no, we're not going to be pushed around.
Right. So how far will they push?
How far will each side push?
Yeah.
And you get the impression that with Trump, it's a lot of what he is doing is for a photo op. It's to make certain that he gets a headline, and that he's able to that he's not necessarily going to follow through on some of the threats that Bolton and Pompeo were putting out there, the Secretary of State and the National Security Advisor putting out there, but it's pretty high stakes stuff. It's
very high stakes, and it's like dogs.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, exactly. And the thing is that we don't really. What's always left out of the equation is the American side of the aggression here. Mm-hmm. I heard a story on NPR, and they were talking about how the Iranians had taken over this British tanker, and throughout the entire interview, not once was it mentioned that the British had taken over an Iranian tanker on the way to taking oil to Syria. And so it was like the reason that they sequestered that British tanker was in retribution for the other one, but it wasn't even mentioned. And it's like these, and that wasn't American aggression, but you could sort of.
But there's always something going on it's not just one-sided. There's not just one evil doer. It takes two to create evil.
Right. Yeah, and this and in the United States, we are blissfully unaware of what of the rest of the world sees as American aggression, and so and that's by design, because there is a lot of there's a lot of money in the military, and there's a lot of prestige and American patriotism and wrapped up in American aggression. So anyway, this is a longish article, but we only publish once every 2 months anymore. So you can take this to bed with you and maybe read through this one article.
Take several days to get through this.
Yeah, but it's not a light. Connections isn't really. I wouldn't say it's a light read, but I think the articles that are in here are real important for people to put everything into context and make connections. Page 10 talks about the Chicano Community Program Radio Reunion moving to Weber Point. And this is
August 11th.
August 11th from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. It is a great. There are just so many great entertainers here. It's going to be a car show. It's going to be Juan Escovedo is going to be there. Latin Magic, Mike Torres Group. There's a bunch of Ramirez Brothers Blues Band, Valley Folklore,
Busy and Dos Four.
all sorts. And for a cover of $10 at the door at Weber Point, this is probably the best entertainment deal you're going to find this year. And so you ought to go and check it out. It is I think it's a Sunday, right? Sunday, August 11th. And so down at Weber Point, yep. And it's at 10 in the morning from 6 p.m. Get there early, stay there late. There's all sorts of booths and stuff for you to
get information, buy little goodies and good food.
Yeah. So anyway, so check it out. It's at Weber Point, right downtown. And it's on page 10 is more details on it. If you want more details, what did we have a
website?
Website tvosj.org. That's the voice of San Joaquin.org. And so check it out. On page 11, we've already sort of touched on that a little bit, where we talked about the San Joaquin protesters protesting the human detention camps. And in a box, we'd have U.S. quietly opening shelters for babies and young kids without mothers.
This is just beyond belief, and I know many people are losing sleep just thinking about this.
Yes.
And it's just, we need to be constantly calling
Vigilant.
Representatives,
Yes.
being out there on the street, writing letters.
This is not acceptable. This is not normal.
It's beyond
This is not American.
belief right now.
Yeah, and and anybody who when Trump goes and talks about Elijah Cummings and how Baltimore is so awful, and these are all distractions. These these attacks on individual Congress members are distractions from the real things that are happening at the border. People are dying. People are being separated. Children are having to sleep in dog kennels. It is just unacceptable.
Right.
Page 12. Okay, we talk about winter squash in your summer garden, which is sort of a strange thing to think about, planting winter squash right now, but
it's not really doesn't grow in the winter.
That's right.
It actually grows during the summer and
that's
fall.
right.
But if
Yeah.
you store it correctly,
That's right.
you can have it all winter.
That's right. Yeah, because there's not a whole lot of winter crops that we have in San Joaquin Valley, and so but we might have some greens or some some broccoli maybe, but the winter squash is really fall squash that you plant in the summer.
Yeah.
And so anyway, so Shane is very, very good to point that out. And so if you're in the process of putting together your summer, your winter, your next garden after your tomatoes are over, this is the place to come to figure out what squash to put in. Then climate change. Now, climate change is always thought of as being some sort of, elitist thing where, only well-off people are concerned about the environment, and it's just a bunch of folks who are living in condos and who well-off folks. But really, climate change is a poor people's issue because
They've been affected by it more. Most.
Yeah. People who live in areas that are low-lying, are in floodplains, and And so, and also people who are not able to get out of the really hot climate that climate change has given us. Vulnerable communities have been dealing with the effects of climate change and environmental pollution for decades now. Some countries, the Maldives in particular, Seychelles, are in danger of disappearing altogether. And then you just look at what the most recent storms that happened in Louisiana and New Orleans.
Right.
And the places that flooded weren't the homes of the well-off, rich and famous. It was the folks of the homes of normal working folks.
Right.
Yeah. So that's an interesting article. Carbon-saturated oceans, the tipping point to mass extinction. And this is talking about not just a lot of people think that the carbon is all just up in the atmosphere trapping greenhouse gases, but carbon is also being absorbed within the oceans, and that if the oceans get saturated in the same way that if the oceans warm to a certain degree, they will no longer be able to support life. And so anyway, this is a very interesting article. I never really thought of carbon-saturated oceans, so I wanted to run that one. Federal biologists removed means less water for wildlife. And so and this is an article that particularly talks about the Westlands area here in Central Valley, where the folks who were assessing the quality of water being shipped down to the Central Valley, that the group that has expertise in the area are being taken out and being replaced with people who are going to tow more of the
Right.
Trump
They must
line.
have been saying something that was true
Right.
and difficult to hear.
Right. Yeah. So Trump ordered these in October 2018. Ordered the incredibly complex rules governing California's water supply to be drafted faster than ever before. We will have it done very, very quickly, Trump said. And so I hope you enjoy the water you're going to have, talking to these farmers. And so some see the fingerprints of Interior Secretary David Bernhardt, who used to be a lawyer for the Westlands water people. And so anyway, so watching these water rules, and thank heavens that we do have a Delta Keeper, or Bill Jennings, who is on this case. But just keep an eye out for some crazy water rules coming out of the feds who monitor, and we think that we had a victory in the Twin Tunnels, but there's always a new front that
Save the Delta. Get involved with them. They're a great organization.
Yeah, Restore the Delta is still around.
Restore the Delta, yes.
Restore the Delta is still around, and now we're talking about the Twin Tunnels may be gone, but there's still an EIR, or Environmental Impact Report, that is going to be developed for a single tunnel.
Yeah.
And that is the compromise that. So we'll just see if that crashes and burns as well. But even if it does, then on the federal side, Trump is covering his bets and making certain that the people who are making decision about the federal water project are going to try to facilitate as much federal water going to farmers as they can. So read that article on the bottom, page 13. Page 14, how multinationals steal wealth from developing countries today. And so I think my degrees in college were about development economics, and so there was a historical way that developed countries extracted resources from less developed countries. Now it's maybe not as politically correct to do it the way they used to do it, and now multinationals are stealing wealth in developing countries by essentially mispricing resources. And I'm sure this has happened all the time, but in terms of mispricing the way that resources are taken out, and then also how tax laws are rigged in different countries, so that essentially they're
Making more profit.
making more making profit and not having to pay any tax for the extraction. And so this is a similar environmental concern, is that a lot of times the true cost of a resource isn't in the price, because a lot of times what'll happen is like the pollution that it takes to create the plastic bottle, or to create the uranium mine, or to create the tailings, or the all the costs, the environmental costs, are somehow not priced into the product. So it makes the product that the anti-environmental product that you're buying look a lot cheaper. And so that's the way fossil fuels are. That's the way nuclear power is. That's the way a lot of like say palm oil, that is in just about everybody's.
Right.
We had a good article on palm oil a few issues ago. How if the real price of the extinction of animals that happens when when palm plantations are put in to kick out rainforests and essentially makes the orangutan extinct, that whole process is not priced into the cost of the palm oil. All it is just slash and burn, cut down these forests in a less developed country, cheap oil, good. And everybody gets to eat ramen. That's
Right.
Profit. So anyway, so this is an interesting economic article if you're interested in economics. So, which I am.
Yes.
Yes. And then moving on to sort of an old issue, but something that a lot of times we don't really go back and revisit things because it's such old news. But, it's the same way that when Kristie and I were working on Latin American issues back in the 80s.
80s,
yeah. And a lot of the times, I remember Norman Shumway saying, well, you have your sets of facts and we have I have my set of facts in terms of talking about death squads in El Salvador. And it turns out that every fact that we had were real facts, and every fact that Shumway had were not real facts. And so, it's important for us to make certain that we set the record straight from time to time, because, moving on and letting it sit the way that it sat sometimes leaves a false impression that people like Elliott Abrams or any of the people that are put into power somehow that they were right back then, and there's nothing to see here anymore.
Oh, yeah.
And so this is talking about the CIA torture unredacted, what was hidden, and it's talking about what happened in the early 2000s. Talking about everybody wanted to find out what was going on in these CIA torture chambers that we were running. And of course, there was nothing there, and the report was hidden, and that Feinstein tried to get the thing published, and it wasn't able to be published. And so anyway, this is an article talking about, this was what was hidden. If you're interested, check out the Bureau of Investigative Journal and see what they have in there. But anyway, it pretty much confirms a lot of the things that we were concerned about at the time. On page 16, we're talking about the billionaires are against Bernie and the rest of us. And I think this isn't so much a pat on the back for Bernie, but it is essentially saying that the billionaire class is not interested in any of the policies any of the progressive policies that most of America is for. If you take a look on the back page, Robert Reich has an article that says the center in U.S. politics is very progressive, and so the billionaire class is not interested. That 76% of Americans favor higher taxes on the super rich, including over half of registered Republicans. Over 60% favor a wealth tax on fortunes of $50 million or more. What about health care? Well, 70% want Medicare for all. 60% of Republicans support allowing anyone under 65 to buy into Medicare. 92% want lower prescription drug prices. Over 70% think we should be able to buy drugs imported from Canada. I On family issues, more than 80% of Americans want paid maternity leave. 79% of voters want more affordable child care, including 80% of Republicans. 60% of Americans support free college tuition for those who meet income requirements. 62% think climate change is man-made and needs addressing. 84% think money has too much influence in politics. 77% support limits on campaign spending, and that includes 71% of Republicans. These are the policies. These are so-called progressive policies that are so far on the far left that we can't even discuss them. And these are the policies that the billionaires are. The reason why billionaires are against Bernie, because each one of those
brings up every single one.
Each one of those things that was just mentioned, that Robert Reich mentioned as being popular, are things that are going to cost these people in their pocketbooks.
Right.
And it's not like they don't already have enough money. It's not like, that they could afford a few million or two here.
They could sell one or two or three of their houses.
That's right. So the list here of the billionaires is listed here in terms of the folks who are talking about not supporting that they don't mind any of the other Democratic candidates, but they don't like Bernie Sanders, because I think what they read in Bernie Sanders, and when you watch, it's not a endorsement of Bernie, although I like Bernie the best. It's just interesting to see how check out his performance in the coming debate. Check out how they review him. Check out how much coverage they give him. Check out the disdain to which people, even MSNBC. I just read a real interesting article about how MSNBC skews their coverage against Bernie. They would be fine with Elizabeth Warren, but they do not like Bernie Sanders, because I think they see him as being somebody who is tried, true, and is not going to back down.
Right.
He's been living this his entire life.
Right.
So anyway, so check out that article and check out the thing on page 20, which is the Robert Reich piece. Israel's apartheid wall stands for 15 years after UN deemed it illegal. And of course,
another amazing,
yeah.
I cannot believe it continues.
15 years, yeah.
Continues and continues,
Right.
and gets worse
And the
and
thing,
worse.
yeah, and these are folks who, there are folks who say, well, this is being anti-Semitic. Well, the thing is that it's not really anti-Semitic. It's being pro human rights.
Right.
And what we have to look at is that when folks like John Bolton and Pompeo say, well, this group is violating UN resolution this and UN resolution that, Israel has violated so many UN resolutions,
yeah.
And so this is one of the ones that is particularly egregious. Page 17 talks about a failure to impeach Trump reaffirms him. We talked about that. You can take a look through that, because it's going to be timely through the next couple months. And then on page 18, this is an interesting article, and I wanted to shout this out to Kathy Mathis and to Fred Scheel. Community land trusts help make housing affordable, and it's a nice discussion, and it jumps up to page 15. But it's a nice discussion on community land trusts and how community land trusts can be used to develop low-income housing, and it's a good article. There's a good reference, and you can jump to it on the internet. But anyway, community land trust is a way by which land itself can be kept in trust to be used only for low-income housing, and then that the housing above it can be dealt with in any number of ways. I mean, you can build a condo, you can build tiny houses, people can own the units, but then when they leave, the land the people can't profit off the sale of the land. And so anyway, so it's a very interesting article, and you ought to check it out. It's a nice read. On the left-hand side, Susan Moroloko wrote up talking about high school voter registration because the primary is coming up. And so, and this is talking about registering young people for an election that's coming up, or even beyond that, because
and getting the kids together getting high school students together to plan how they're going to get people to register and vote.
Right.
So it's
right.
League of Women Voters. That's great.
Yeah. So wonderful. And then there's the calendar, of course. And then on the back page, Eastern San Joaquin County groundwater meeting slated. So if you're interested in groundwater in Eastern San Joaquin County, there's a series of discussions here. This is the first, I think this is the first year that they were all the new groundwater regulation law is coming into effect, and it's very important for us to keep track of this. Even though last year was a good rainy year, we know we live in a drought-stricken area, and so keep an eye on this. Make certain that we're managing our groundwater resource really well, because it's every one of our resources. It's not just the owner of the deepest well that is able to extract that stuff. So
That's Connections. Check
that's
it out.
Connections. Check it
Get
out.
involved.
Yeah.
See what's going on.
Thanks, Kristie. Thanks for coming
Thank you.
by
It's
and
good to be
plowing
back.
through this with us. And yeah, it's great. Have a great summer and stay involved. Thanks a lot.